It's midweek. Hello and welcome to Business Live. In our headlines tonight, general prices of goods and services are not getting any better as increasing food prices, housing, electricity and fuel push inflation rate for the month of October to 40.4%.
Price index for the month of October 2022 stood at 144.4% relative to 102.9% that was recorded for the same period, October 2021.
Meanwhile, the economist says the worst is yet to come as the underlying threats to inflation still persist. Ahead, we'll hear from research lead of GCB Capital, Kojo Backah.
From last month, it was about 2.7. For the month of October, it's 2.0. For the month of October, it's coming 2.7 really. And so it tells you that the underlying pressures to inflation are still there, and so the upward track will continue for a while.
Also, government quest to reduce fuel prices questioned after primary distributors' margin was increased by 6 pesos effective November 1, 2022. And also on the Joy Business van, how Vineyard Exotics became a major supplier of juices for hotels, local airlines and supermarkets. We've got details of these and many others in a moment. Please stay. Grateful you could stay on. I am Pious Kojo Backah. Let's now look at our stories. Increment in food prices, housing, electricity and fuel pushed the inflation rate for the month of October to 40.4% up from 37.2% recorded in September this year. Addressing the media, government statistician Professor Samuel Kobnenim explained that all items in the component for calculating the rate of inflation recorded an increase. The following report has more.
This means cost of credit is expected to go up further as the Bank of Ghana is set to take a decision on the policy rate, the rate at which it lends to commercial banks. The food inflation recorded the highest rate among all the components as against non-food inflation, according to figures from the Ghana Statistical Service. Almost all 307 items used in measuring inflation figures recorded an increase for the period of October. Here is government statistician Professor Samuel Kobnenim explaining the rate of inflation.
Consumer price index for the month of October 2022 stood at 144.4% relative to 102.9% that was recorded for the same period, October 2021. Given these two indices, year-on-year inflation for the month of October 2022 stood at 40.4%, indicating a 3.2 percentage point difference between the year-on-year inflation that was recorded for the month of September 2022, which stood at 37.2%. From a food and non-food perspective, we see a sharp increase in food inflation of about 5.9% year-on-year inflation between September 2022 and October 2022, with a rate of October 2022 43.7% relative to 37.8% that was recorded for September 2022.
In the regional division, the Eastern region recorded the highest rate of inflation at more than 51%, whilst Volta region recorded the least with 25.8%. Professor Enim explains the regional breakdown and the contribution of the Greater Accra region in the overall rate.
Comparing the region with the highest rate of inflation and the region with the lowest rate of inflation, we see a difference of about two times rate of inflation between these two regions, as Eastern region recorded a rate of inflation of 51.1% and Volta region 25.8%. Looking at the regional shares, keeping in mind that Eastern region recorded the highest rate of inflation with a weight of close to a third for Greater Accra region. Greater Accra region contributed more than a third to the overall inflation that was recorded in October 2022. Specifically, Greater Accra region contributed 34.7% of the 40.4% inflation that was recorded for the month of October 2022.
Month-on-month inflation between September and October was 2.7%.
Meanwhile, research lead at GCB Capital, Kojo Backah, says Ghanaians should brace for worse inflation rates in the coming months because the underlying threats to inflation still persist.
So a number of, all of what the analysis in the past as to whether you think to not, it's of course, all other factors were held constant. But between that time and now, when you saw in the June, July area, when you saw inflation looking like it's about peaking and the month-on-month trend shows some sustained decline, I mean, you would assume that if that trend continues, then yeah, we should see inflation peak and start decelerating around this fourth quarter period. But what we did not envisage around that time is that we'd have more than 27% depreciation in the CD in a single month, and then continuing. What we did not expect was that there would be some 60% hike in petroleum prices at the pump in just one pricing window. What you did not also anticipate is that food harvest will turn out not to impact food prices in general after all. And so there are a lot of exogenous factors. And for this particular period, you are seeing increased rates of deficit monetization from the central bank, which is in itself inflationary. Last Monday, a 2-year bond matured, 2.3 billion face value. There was no rollover, so those maturities would have been refinanced or would have been paid off using central bank financing. That liquidity injected into the system would actually prove inflationary, really. And I guess it's the reason the Bank of Ghana sustained the policy rate hike to mop up some of those excess liquidity. So if you have the instance where you could not have predicted, but the Bank of Ghana is financing the deficit, you have instance where petroleum prices are surging at the pump. You have the instance where CD has depreciated by almost 60% year to date. Obviously, inflation will go out of hand, and that is what we are seeing. You see the month-on-month trend from last month, it was about 2.7. For the month of October, it's 2.0. For the month of October, it's coming 2.7 really. And so it tells you that the underlying pressures to inflation are still there, and so the upward track will continue for a while.
Economist Courage put it there. Now, economist Dr. Emmanuel Kuma is proposing the composition of a robust, localized, independent body that will ensure the strict adherence to fiscal discipline post-IMF agreement. According to him, since Ghana entered into an agreement with the fund some years ago, history shows that the country had not been able to maintain the same fiscal discipline it entered into the agreement. His call is coming at a time Ghana has entered an agreement with the International Monetary Fund for the 17th time for a bailout. Economist Dr. Emmanuel Kuma spoke to Joy Business on the sidelines of the Graphic Business Stanbic breakfast meeting held in Accra.
I think it's a very important question that you pose. I think that there are, we can look at other countries. Is the Council of Economic Advice in the U.S. is an example, or National Bureau of Economic Research, or Monitoring Committee. I think that these ideas, I don't have the answers, but all I can tell you is that the fact that we had these problems suggests that somehow we're not able to monitor and implement carefully. So where it should be situated is not the issue. The key thing is to embed it with power to be able to enforce the programs that post-IMF we decide to implement. And I like your question. Can it be done in our country with our culture? Listen, look at other countries, Singapore, Mauritius, other countries. Why are they financial disciplined? I think that we can learn. I think this is the beginning of the conversation. I throw out these ideas. Let's have an institution with power in the country, outside government, to be able, maybe with private sector, a lot of private sector participation, to make sure that it works.
Meanwhile, economist Professor Godfred Bokwin has joined calls for government to streamline activities in the extractive sector to block revenue leakages in the country. He says Ghana's revenue from the extractive sector as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest among its peers on the continent. He added that Ghana could earn more than it is seeking from the International Monetary Fund for a bailout from the extractive sector.
More than 80% of our export earnings still driven by primary commodities. Then you look at how we have structured our revenue generation activities. It's a big issue. Okay, our revenue performance is not the best relative to the size of our GDP. Of course, it's not every aspect of GDP that is taxable and its redistribution. But if you relate how much you generate to GDP, gives you a fair idea. I'll give you just a few examples. We have just about 2.4 million people who are paying direct income taxes out of an estimation of 13.7 million labor force. Of course, some are unemployed, so. And then when it comes to the extractive sector, if you look at the fiscal regime, and I believe that we need to start that conversation now, and take another look at the kind of structure that we have put in place, because Ghana is not getting its fair share from the extractive sector in terms of the value added. Ghana's revenue from the extractive sector as a percentage of the extractive sector value added is just around 19%. The average for middle-income countries is around 54%. In fact, Nigeria and Botswana, we are told, are doing around 50%. If we were to collect enough revenue from the extractive sector, just as Nigeria is doing, studies have shown that Ghana will be able to collect, in addition, about $4.32 billion.
Economist Professor Godfred Bofkin speaking there. Moving on to one of our headline stories, the government's quest to reduce prices of petroleum products at the pumps has again been questioned by some operators after the National Petroleum Authority directed players to increase primary distributors' margin by 6 pesos effective November 1. My colleague George Yafe has more.
The National Petroleum Authority, in an email to the oil marketing companies and other players, directed them to increase their primary distributors' margin from 7 pesos on the price build-up to 13 pesos per litre on diesel and petrol. It also covered other petroleum products on the market. The authority in the email maintained that this is in line with the current economic conditions, hence the increase. The margin takes care of the cost of transporting petroleum products to other depots in the country. Now, this meant that you paid 6 pesos more for fuel last week Tuesday, when this was not due to the city's depreciation as well as the cost of importing finished petroleum products. Some of the oil marketing companies have told Joy Business that prices could have gone down if it hadn't been this margin review. For some of these players, at the time that government is looking for cheaper sources of petroleum products to reduce prices at the pumps locally, they find this move by the state as interesting. Some have also argued that why can't government use the windfall from crude oil revenue to finance the shortfall with some of these margins? This is because of the impact of an increase in fuel prices on inflation and the broader economy.
And that's our program for tonight. I am Pious Kojo Backah. Always a pleasure serving you. For more news, feel free log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Great to see you.